Paul Krugman returns tonight by popular demand. After his last appearance here, one particularly loud but ultimately irrelevant critic took a swipe at him. That critic, Donald Trump, who launched an insult at the Nobel Prize-winning economist. That was harsher than most attacks Krugman has faced, though still not as vicious as many of the things Trump has said about me. Tonight, Professor Krugman will have the chance to respond if he chooses, but first, let's begin with today's economic headlines. Core inflation, which excludes food and energy, rose 3.1% last month. That's the fastest annual rate we've seen in 5 months. According to the New York Times, July's numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics are a clear sign that tariffs are hitting businesses hard. More companies are now passing those added costs directly to consumers after a long period of relatively muted price increases. The economy is weaker because of tariffs, says Stephen Stanley, chief U.S. economist at Santander. Businesses are cautious, they're not investing, they're not hiring. Consumers, facing higher prices, are also pulling back, and right on cue. At 10:24 a.m., Donald Trump tweeted, "Tariffs have not caused inflation or any other problems for America other than massive amounts of cash pouring into our treasury coffers." Here's the fact. 100% of tariff revenue comes from the United States, paid by American companies and individuals who import foreign goods. No foreign government pays these tariffs, and none ever will. Every cent of the $130 billion collected so far this year was paid by Americans at U.S. ports of entry directly to federal officials. Now, if the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court agree with the U.S. Court of International Trade, the experts on this matter, that these tariffs are illegal and unconstitutional, all that money may have to be refunded. And that refund would go to Americans, which makes the letter Trump's lawyer sent to the appeals court even more astonishing. The Court of International Trade has already unanimously ruled that Trump's tariffs violate the law. The case is now on appeal. Yet today, Trump's Justice Department lawyer told the court on paper that if the U.S. had to return these so-called trillions of dollars, a false number, by the way, the country could collapse instantly from strength to failure. That's a lie twice over. First, there aren't trillions, only $130 billion. Second, it's absurd to claim returning that sum to the taxpayers who paid it would crash the economy. This is the same Donald Trump who cut taxes for America's wealthiest citizens by $1 trillion without hesitation. The letter went further, warning that a refund could cause a 1929-style catastrophe: homes lost, jobs wiped out, savings gone, even Social Security and Medicare endangered. All this for returning money to the people it was taken from illegally. In the context of the U.S. economy and federal budget, $130 billion is a drop in the bucket. Even the Wall Street Journal mocked the filing, calling it a doomsday tariff letter. And today's inflation report comes as the Bureau of Labor Statistics adjusts to life under Trump's new leadership after he fired the previous commissioner for telling the truth. His replacement, E.J. Antoni, told Fox News that until the BLS corrects itself, it should stop issuing monthly jobs reports altogether and only publish quarterly numbers. This is one of the most reckless and anti-data statements ever made by a presidential appointee to lead the BLS. Our next guest, Paul Krugman, wrote recently in his Substack about why Donald Trump promotes incompetence, drawing from Hannah Arendt's classic The Origins of Totalitarianism. Arendt explained that authoritarian regimes replace talented people, no matter their loyalties, with crackpots and fools, precisely because their lack of skill ensures blind loyalty. She also predicted the hostility toward research and the rapid dismantling of a nation's scientific foundation. As she wrote, leaders like these persecute higher forms of intellectual activity because they resent anything they cannot understand. True domination allows no room for independent thought or initiative in any sphere of life. Joining me now is Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman, distinguished professor at the City University of New York Graduate Center, former New York Times columnist, and now writing on Substack. Professor Krugman, thank you for being here again. Before we get into Donald Trump's recent remarks about you, let's first address this incredible claim presented to the appeals court today that Overturning Trump's tariffs would somehow plunge America into a 1929-style collapse.
Yeah, it's absurd. The federal government is massive, and in that context, the amount of money we're talking about really isn't that big. The real issue would be the bureaucratic mess involved. Donald Trump imposed these tariffs by invoking emergency powers meant to be used only in the case of an actual economic crisis. But we clearly aren't in one. In fact, Trump himself keeps saying the economy is booming. By his own admission, the conditions required to justify those tariffs never existed. The problem now is that the money has already been collected, and legally, it would have to be returned. That means identifying everyone who paid cutting refund. Checks to all the importing companies, from massive retailers like Walmart to small import-export businesses that ordered goods and paid the tariffs. It would be an administrative nightmare. But let's be clear, that's not a problem for the American economy. That's Donald Trump's problem, and a problem for his team of incompetence.
Well, the Treasury absolutely knows how to handle something like this. They issue millions of tax refunds every year. It's what they're set up to do. The only reason they've never had to do it in this case is because no president has ever done anything this outrageous before. Today, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent actually said, and I'm quoting here, "The amount of money that's coming in here. I think the more deals we've done, the more money coming in, it gets harder and harder for SCOTUS to rule against this." So there you have it. The Treasury Secretary essentially admitting that bringing in $130 billion in tariffs somehow makes it difficult for the Supreme Court to uphold the Constitution.
So essentially, the message is, yes, we've taken a huge amount of money, and giving it back would be inconvenient. Therefore, the Supreme Court should declare it legal. That's astonishing. Yeah, it's absurd. The federal government is massive, and in that context, the amount of money we're talking about really isn't that big. The real issue would be the bureaucratic mess involved. Donald Trump imposed these tariffs by invoking emergency powers meant to be used only in the case of an actual economic crisis. But we clearly aren't in one. In fact, Trump himself keeps saying the economy is booming. By his own admission, the conditions required to justify those tariffs never existed. The problem now is that the money has already been collected, and legally, it would have to be returned. That means identifying everyone who paid cutting refund. Checks to all the importing companies, from massive retailers like Walmart to small import-export businesses that ordered goods and paid the tariffs. It would be an administrative nightmare. But let's be clear, that's not a problem for the American economy. That's Donald Trump's problem, and a problem for his team of incompetence. That's going to be an interesting question. For the record, I don't trust this Supreme Court. But if it were to do its job properly, the truth is, there are no deals. We know what an actual trade deal looks like. It's a signed agreement, approved by the U.S. Congress, signed by the President, and also signed by the foreign governments involved. We've made many over the years. They've run hundreds or even thousands of pages, spelling out every detail, and they carry the force of law. What we have here is nothing like that. This is just the Trump administration claiming we have a deal. In many cases, the foreign countries supposedly involved have flatly denied it. Take the claim that Europeans are going to hand Donald Trump $600 billion for his slush fund. The European Commission has publicly said they never agreed to anything of the sort. These are fantasy deals. And yet, the idea is that the Supreme Court should ignore clear U.S. law based on Trump's imaginary agreements with other countries. They might give in this particular court, but they absolutely shouldn't. That's not the America I grew up in. And then we have Donald. Trump's pick to run the Bureau of Labor Statistics, saying there's no need to publish monthly economic data. First of all, that's illegal. The law requires the BLS to release monthly jobs reports. It's not optional, so halting them would be another blatant violation of the law. And of course, no one actually believes they're concerned about data accuracy. This is about controlling the narrative. If you stop releasing numbers that reveal weaknesses in the economy, Trump can keep boasting about how great things are without contradiction. It's astonishing. Just one more example of how brazen they are in their shamelessness.